Trinity Rep and Providence Public Library present America 2, Reckoning and Resilience. America 2, Reckoning and Resilience marks the 6th year of the America 2 initiative. This 5-part online series combines theater, music, and art with stories from our community and seeks to catalyze community dialogue around the many challenges and potential opportunities of this particular moment. As we confront the aftermath of a polarizing election season, observe the year's anniversary of the arrival of the pandemic in Rhode Island, and reckon with the structural racism and anti-Black violence that continues to rock our communities. Hosted by Director of Community Engagement, Michelle Cruz, Providence Public Library's Program and Exhibitions Director, and our own conversationalist in residence, Christina Bevilacqua, and Joe Wilson Jr., resident actor and founder of the Center for Activism and Performance at Trinity Rep. These episodes will investigate the impact of the challenges of the past year and how we move forward as a community. Hi, I'm Michelle Cruz, Director of Community Engagement, and I want to welcome you to America 2, It's Our Education. You're going to hear from different folks this evening, but the dialogue does not end today. We want to hear from you, our community at large. Share your story from these challenging times, or maybe something that resonates with you from tonight's conversation, for possible inclusion in our culminating event in May. You can do this by calling the America 2 hotline at 401-259-0676 or email us at stories@trinityrep.com. Joining Christina and Joe for America 2, It's Our Education, our guests, Tosin George, Athena Holloway, Jassmen Lee Johnson, Amy Lopes, and Sokeo Ros. But first, a reading from Tosin George titled The New Normal.
Hi, I'm Tosin George, and this is a piece that I wrote in around April of last year, towards the beginning of the pandemic, entitled The New Normal. Stay home. Only leave the house for essential needs. Wear medical face masks when you do. This whole situation kind of sounds like the plot of one of those dystopian books, if you ask me. A deadly virus infecting basically every person it comes into contact with, forcing entire countries to shut down and putting the world as we know it on hold. Where did it start? How did we get here? Why didn't anyone do anything to stop it? A global pandemic. You always see this kind of stuff in the movies, read it in books, but you never really think it'll happen in real life. FaceTime, Zoom, social media. The only way we can now interact with people outside of our homes. You never really appreciate the little things in life until they're taken away from you. The drive to school every day, eating lunch with your friends, going to restaurants. Why did this happen? Why did things have to change? Over 200,000 people are dead, and all we can do is stay home, sit back, and watch. I know I'm repeating myself, but it all sounds so much like the plot of a very messed up horror movie. We know nothing about this virus. No vaccine, no way to treat it. We don't even know if we get it and recover from it, if we'll get it again. But if people can get it after they've had it, does that mean this is the new normal? That this quarantine will never end?
Tosin, thank you so much for that wonderful reading of your piece. I think everybody listening, it's very evocative, and yet also we realize that we've traveled a long way since then. And I just wonder, as you're now a 10th grader at Cranston East High School, can you, when you hear yourself read it, when you hear those words again, does it feel familiar? Does it feel like something far away? How how have things changed for you and in the world? And if you were to go back and talk to Tosin of April 2020 from Tosin of right now, what would you tell her about how to get through this year?
It definitely feels very far away because I feel like when I wrote this piece, I was kind of just grappling with everything that was going on, and I was just trying to put my feelings into words. And if I were to go back to talk to myself last year, I would probably tell her to not be afraid of the unexpected, because I feel like so many things have happened this year that I never would have seen coming. And that was very scary for me. And I feel like if I had just been prepared to be okay with whatever was to come, it would have helped me a little bit.
Are there things in particular that you think about in that realm of the unknown?
I think the reckoning with racial justice and the social protests of the summer was something I definitely didn't see coming at that particular moment in time. So, but for me personally, it was something that I wanted to happen because I feel like these racial issues are something that are a part of my everyday life. And I think that the fact that people were starting to have more conversations about it and engage with others about it is something that was important and should have happened. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Joe, who'll introduce you to another wonderful young person.
Hey, everybody. It's so great to be with you all tonight. I am really, really excited to introduce you to an incredible young person, musician and classical high school student, Athena Holloway. How you doing, Athena? How's it going?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm fine. How was Japanese class?
It was fun. We were planning our festival that we're having in April.
Great. Great. Well, you have to teach me some Japanese sometime, all right?
Okay.
Well, let me ask you, how about you, Athena? When you think about your feelings and what happened with the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, and how we were anticipating what would happen in the future, you know, it struck me in listening to that Tosin's incredible poem, and no offense to Tosin, that it's sad to say that now 200 deaths is dated. It's now 500. And so my question to you is, how do you feel now? What journey have you traveled? Did your expectations or responses change along the way?
Okay, so that's a very loaded question. And for me, at the beginning of this whole quarantine pandemic, of course, I was feeling a lot of the same feelings that everyone else was feeling of kind of isolation, longing to get outside, longing to see my friends and do normal things again. But I also took that and turned it into one of my motivations to keep going, to say, hey, we're in a pandemic, everyone's locked down right now, so maybe we can use this opportunity to get ahead in schoolwork, to get ahead in maybe your life, organizing more things, having more time with family since they're at home now. And so I think that using this pandemic as a strength can also be a source of power for someone, but also recognizing that there are bad things that come with it, and catering to your mental health is also essential.
You know, in a time that's made us both students and teachers again, you know, as a professor, my pedagogy and how I do what I do for the past 25 years has completely changed. And I'm with you in living in that space of trying to find my creative spark within that and being optimistic with that and embracing learning these new challenges that confront us. Can you speak more specifically to how your educational experience has been affected by not only COVID, but if you want to speak to all of the other ills that COVID has unlocked in our society?
Well, first of all, I think with COVID, people have had more free time on their hands, whether it's watching the news more or reading more or spending more time around other people. And so I think that especially during the summer, where a lot of things were coming up with protests and the Black Lives Matter movement, I think a lot of people were following that and watching it, and a lot of people became more informed. And so I think pertaining to school and the education system, a lot of people's eyes have been open. A lot of people have been advocating more for equal treatment in school. I myself have been advocating for that. I had found that there was a problem with teacher autonomy and how sometimes students can be judged based on just how they look without even the teacher knowing the person yet. It's kind of like a first impression thing. And everyone gets first impressions, but it becomes a problem when it affects your grades or how you're treated in the classroom. And so I think that without that push from the summer, without me seeing other people organizing events, peaceful things, speaking on things that have affected them in their life, I don't think that I would have had the courage to go to the administration and bring up issues that I've had in school and in the classroom. And so I genuinely thank the summer for that. And I thank the pandemic, or at least the quarantine in a sense, for being at home with my mother, watching these things go down on the news and having helpful conversations about it.
Great, great. So, in your feeling is that it put everything, it actually focused you and focused everything in your world, and people began to have that same experience of focus, and that's how we were all able to become more aware, or continue to become aware of the challenges. This is a perfect segue to Amy. Amy, my friend.
Yes, Joe, thank you for letting me be part of this tonight, especially with these kiddos on here. Boy, they are the actual teachers, that's for sure.
They are the real deal, which is why I said I have become both teacher and student. My dear friend Amy Lopes, we have been in the trenches for a while. Amy is a 5th grade teacher at the William Debate School, and I have to be fully transparent that Amy and I also work with the Manton Avenue Project. And so we have had the extreme privilege of seeing so many young people like Athena and like Tosin come through our doors, both at school and at the Manton Avenue Project. Amy, can you speak specifically as an educator, and from one educator to another, and to all the educators out there and parents, what has this experience been like for you in terms of not only COVID, but and I know, and I don't want to get too detailed, but how this has excavated the challenges that continue to fester within our communities and our neighborhoods. So if you could speak first of all about your experience as an educator, and then speak about your experience as a community leader.
So a couple of things I think about, and especially with what Athena and Tosin have said, and I think about education and some of the inequalities that have been brought in the forefront in education. COVID was ignited many of the things that I saw. Looking at within the classroom, the inequities when we had to transition to distance learning. And all I thought about was, I've been teaching for 22 years. How am I going to now ensure that my students get an equitable education online, knowing that for a lot of them, they're taking care of young ones at home. For a lot of them, there is no internet. For a lot of them, a Wi-Fi. For many of my students, food is becoming an issue and not being able to be in school. So when I think about all of that, our world was flipped upside down. And the way I addressed it back in March, when this all transpired, was how can I make it as normal in such an abnormal time? And one of the things I would spend each of my mornings with my students last year and continue this year in person is just letting the students talk about how they're feeling, do a temperature check-in with them every morning, and just give them a chance to digest how they're feeling, what they're hearing, what they're experiencing, and what they're seeing. So that's one of my main things. And then taking the lead from my students, looking at, was this enough to just let them get it out? Or where do we go from here? What else do we need to do? Is the student having difficulty at home? Is the student having difficulty with food? Is there anything that we need to get in place for these students to ensure that they are able to succeed?
Well, let me ask you, Amy, and my next question is going to come to you as an artist, and all the artists on this panel will understand that we bring ourselves into the room all the time. We bring ourselves into the work. That's part of what we do. But I found myself as an educator actually really grappling with to be blunt, how much I engage my students in that personal work and conversation. And I just dove right in. And I also found out that, through my students and through their conversations with me, that actually was an outlier based upon their other experiences in other classrooms. So can you speak a little bit about the responsibility and what it meant for you in terms of allowing the space for that kind of personal reflection in a classroom, especially in these times when, we as educators are, we're told we're the liberal left and we shouldn't be talking about these things, and we shouldn't be talking about politics, as Athena and Christina and I talked about today. So how did you balance bringing their voices in the classroom in that personal way, but still being able to use that their voices in a productive way to move forward in the work?
So when I do give them the platform, what they do leads to what we do in the classroom. So one of the things that we've grappled with was our political climate for quite some time. And one of the things we did this year, based on the conversations we were having, I had the children, we worked on a mock election in the school, and we looked at what are the issues that we need to look at and address, not only on a higher society, but within the school and in the classroom. And so taking the lead from what the children say is the direction I try to go. And it's not something I'm afraid to do. I'm not afraid to kind of make waves if waves need to be met and made. Just this past week, one of the books that we have, said that we have to read in class, I'm not happy with how some of the characters are stereotyped in there. I wrote a letter to the company, and I actually have a meeting with them next week to talk about that. So I think taking the lead from the students and using that to drive my instruction, I think is beneficial.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Thank you. I could throw you another question, but I'm not. I'm going to throw it back to my dear friend and my colleague and my neighbor who's across the street, Christina Bevilacqua.
We work across the street, we live across the street, but we have to meet on Zoom. Thank you, everybody. Jassmen Lee Johnson is a visual artist, a curator, a composer, and a scholar. And she was in the middle of a artist in residence program with the Department of Health, going along wonderfully with a great project when the pandemic hit. Jassmen, can you talk a bit about, you were, as you described it the other day, you were kind of like on the verge of the part where it was all going to be about community meetings and gatherings and eating together and gardening together. And you couldn't do any of those things in that way. So how did your artistic practice help you rethink what you could do? And I want to also mention that Jassmen's also a mother of a very young child, and her partner was working in the healthcare field and was exposed to patients with COVID. So you were really, really juggling all of these things that could not compartmentalize. So can you talk us through a little, and we're going to look at some of the work that you did also as part of the project.
Sure. So one of the projects that I wanted to work on at the Department of Health was a community graphic novel cookbook. And the idea was actually inspired by thinking about food access and how in the summer, a lot of students who actually get the bulk of their food at school, like breakfast, lunch, snack, don't have that same access during the summer months. So I wanted to create a program that started in the spring and engaged young people with elders, especially in the immigrant and refugee community, to be inspired by their food traditions, the stories around food and certain recipes. So we were on the verge of gathering a group of young people to be oral history collectors, to be illustrators, and to collect stories. so that we could launch this project later on in the spring, where we would be cooking with folks and cooking together and sharing stories, and all that changed, of course, with the pandemic, with social distancing, with not even being able to be inside together, as well as just being a parent and daycare closing and not having as much autonomy. So yes, I had to figure out how I would continue to work in community with people. And also I was just inspired by thinking about food and how important it is to our health, and how it affects our immunity. So I'm going to go through some slides right now as I continue to speak. But what we decided to do was to go pretty low tech, and continue to try to reach out to young people and to elders in the community, and collect stories and collect recipes just by telephone conversations. This was even before Zoom for me became a thing. We just had phone conversations. And again, some people didn't have internet access or laptops at home and such. So we had to just do some word of mouth, some emailing, some phone calls to collect stories. And we were able to collect stories and recipes from several cultures that exist here in Rhode Island, from Liberia, from Ghana, from Cape Verde, from Mozambique, and many, many more. And I worked with 2 young people remotely. We never worked side by side or even synchronously to create these illustrations, collecting these stories, which happened as phone conversations. So I'm just going through some of the pages of the book. This page, for example, was illustrated by Bonet, who is from Burundi, or spent time in Burundi, I should say, and moved to Providence after being in a camp in Burundi for 15 years. We have vegan recipes, vegetarian recipes, meat-heavy recipes, and just so much help from the community, from the Southside Community Land Trust, especially, in gathering folks and figuring out a way to just keep it simple in having phone conversations and going from there. Yeah.
And then you also talked about a map of breathability that you created as part of this as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and show us how that worked?
Yes. So I wanted to create a map that focused on the Port of Providence, which in and around that area has some of the worst air quality in the state. And also the surrounding communities of color in the South and South Providence have the highest rates of asthma. And early on in the pandemic, especially asthma and breathability was a thing that everybody was thinking about. So I wanted to figure out how to map this, this data from a historical point of view and from a point of view of trauma. That is, how has slavery and colonialism and inequality and racial injustice actually affected our health and where we exist, the neighborhoods we live in, and how we're able to breathe, especially in thinking about police brutality, alongside air quality and trauma. What does all that mean? So I created, which is probably extremely abstract to see from here, but I'll explain. I created a map of breathability that spans about 400 years. And it looks at everything from And I'll zoom in a little bit. Everything from how Rhode Island has been and is implicated in, sorry, just a little tech difficulty there, is implicated in the history of slavery. A lot of people think, oh, you know, like Rhode Island's in the North. It's, we didn't have, you know, plantation, agricultural slavery. And in fact, through the slave trade, through molasses and through the production of rum, and even through the production of certain cotton textiles, which went to the South and to the Caribbean to clothe enslaved people, that Rhode Island played a big role in slavery. So the map goes from there. It shows how early industries, which were really important in just the industrial revolution of this country, actually had a lot of legacy pollution that we're still dealing with today. And there's many things here. There's things around redlining and how that has worked out in Providence specifically. Sorry, this slide keeps jumping back in. There are things around Interstate 95 and how that has separated and segregated certain communities and created more air pollution. There are, just going to slide through here. Anyway, there's a plethora of things that I thought just certainly resonated with not only all of the attention around police brutality and racial justice, but also, you know, we're in a pandemic. How is our environment changing? What if we were forced to actually leave this planet, given our pandemic, given our health, given our air, given how our climate is changing? So this map begins to explore that in a visual, narrative, layering sort of way.
It's really incredible. And I know you talked really eloquently too about having a child who was really at the kind of becoming verbal and at that real sponge stage of development at a time when you had to have her really very isolated. And so just wondering what that, how you sort of managed that experience also.
I know it was rough. It is rough. I have so much respect for all of the educators and caretakers and early childhood learning development specialists, because, you know, we forget as parents how much time actually we do spend away from our children, how much time they're spending at school or in extracurricular activities. And when all that changes, especially with a young child who's 2 years old, who's learning how to speak, whose social, emotional intelligence is developing. So it's really important actually to be around other kids and trying to be creative and figure out ways to do that and to do it safely, whether it's creating a pod of kids or being outside or finding places that, you know, for a while, like state parks and things were closed in Rhode Island. So where can we go? Can we be creative and follow the rules, but still connect with nature and connect with other human beings? So yeah, it was really challenging, and I think it still continues to be, despite the fact that we're learning more about this and people are starting to get vaccinated. But I feel for young people who really are, I don't know. Yeah, it's the new norm, but they're experiencing the world in this way that we're also simultaneously learning how to shift. So it's like we're in it and we're adjusting at the same time.
Thank you so much. A lot of what Jassmen's experience reflects, I think Sokeo it's a nice segue into what your experience has been. I'm going to let Joe take it from here.
It's that. Thank you so much, Jassmen. That was really beautiful and incredible. I mean, it just reminds. We're in this time right now where we're all taking account and demanding that we as communities take account and take responsibility. And it's nice when and that's the great thing about art is that way that we can allow people to see reflections of themselves and to take account of who they are and who we want to be. So thank you so much, Jassmen. It is my pleasure to introduce y'all to Sokeo Ros, who, hey, my man, I'm so happy to see you. And I am so thankful that you are here. Sokeo is an incredible dancer, an incredible choreographer, an extraordinary educator, and he's a parent. I had the pleasure of working with Sok at our last live America 2, It's Our Health, and you led a workshop. We had 4 different workshops that were led by 4 different artists with different pedagogies and ways to practice what they do. And you excavated stories in the community through movement. And it was really, really extraordinary. And not only that, but you performed in the show and you were beautiful and your work was beautiful. And we're so grateful to you. I want to ask you, man, as a teacher and as a parent, and you also live in a multi-generational household. And your work, now I'm gonna get into this question. So, I'm complaining about, gaining my COVID 30 and about how fat I am. And I'm also complaining about, the hardest thing for me is, I live like walking distance to work, or the routine of walking to work, the routine of being in rehearsal, using my body, being present in my body. And now I find myself from sun up to sunset. I watch the sunset through my windows as I'm teaching class. And so how I've been completely deactivated in a personal way. And so I would love for you to speak to, as an artist who relies on their body, can you talk about your experiences this year? And how have you been able to navigate all of these challenges in light of COVID?
Yeah, well, Joe, thank you. Thank you for everyone for having me. It's so crazy because I was just having this conversation the other day, and I feel like we're in this claustrophobic box. And even though I'm in my room or whatever the case may be, we're still in this box of Zoom or whatever streaming service that we're using. And for me, I just can't sit down all the time. I have to get up. So in my office at Providence College, I had them set up a standing desk. So I move it up, I move it down, I move it up, I move it down. I take walks, I take breaks. But during the height of COVID, when we had the global shutdown, I went into like a deep depression. And it was really, really tough because for those that do know me, like Christina and Joe, I'm a in-person kind of person. And I can't take sitting down for too long. It takes a toll on my body. I'm a mover, and also moving with people. As humans, we are natural movers. We have our own natural body movements. We have our own dance language. And it's really tough to not utilize that, right? So it was a stage of just binge watching TV. And then when I try to read books, I wasn't inspired. I wasn't motivated. Until I got calls from friends, text messages, FaceTimes, and then this virtual world started to come about. And when I first had a meeting again with everybody on, just like this, man, the smile went up in my face, and it was just beautiful to see everyone, even through a box. But it still got to the point where I'm not reaching out. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So for artists, for me personally, coming from a marginalized neighborhood, coming here as a refugee, resilience was not a word that we knew about. It was not even an option. We just had to go every day. So it's not like today I'm going to be resilient. No, it's what it is. So this was another limitation, another restriction, another slap in the face, another reality check that as an artist and an educator, I'm like, now that I'm here, let me see if I can find a way to creatively find another path, right? Just like our brains, you can create new pathways in the brain. You can do that physically too. So I started working again, dancing again, even if it was in my room, outside. I had case close, rehearse outside. We brought portable speakers. We started moving, we started dancing. And then the protests kick in heavy. You know, when it comes to systemic racism and social injustices, COVID's going to have to take a back seat because this has been going on since forever. So we wanted to creatively address that. Then we had the Pro Fest with myself, Angel, and Chachi. And beautiful artists came through, spoke their piece, did their piece, danced, beautiful music and poetry, and it was beautiful to see again with face coverings, right? So there's another limitation that we're going through, not just as a visual thing, but also as Jassmen spoke about, you know, it's our bodies. We're breathing, and I came from the West End. There was a factory right there at the end of the street. So it's like I'm breathing in all this air, and then boom, asthma. And I had to counteract that. So I had that kind of artistry and creative side since I was young. And looking back at it, it's like, it's not about being resilient. This was day to day for us. So when the pandemic came in, it took a blow to the gut, but this is like another day for us, but not more globally. So it's that tune where it's like, yo, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get out of this? We're artists. And then beautiful art started to come up again with the limitations, the restrictions. You see them all in the South Side, you see them in the West End, you see them downtown. And then we're presenting these beautiful pieces virtually. And also sometimes you have those social distancing guidelines of setups outside, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a way for us to progress and move forward again and be able to quote unquote breathe again in that sense.
Okay. I
don't know if that answered your question.
You sure did. Let me ask you a question. So do you teach, are you remote or you're hybrid with PC?
So with PC and College Unbound, I am now fully remote.
Fully remote. And so what's the experience then?
Yeah.
So this experience of, because this is what I'm grappling with every single day. You know, I'm getting actually my creative, artistic Jones fix out of, you know, from my students and from helping them to create and we creating something together and not really having that experience as a professional artist with my own selfishness and my own needs to explore and dive into character and have a relationship with an audience. So how do you, the experiences of what you have with Case and the experiences that you have in terms of creating work in this COVID world, how do you take what you've learned and what that feels like into the classroom, into your work in academia with your students? How have you found ways to use that as a source of inspiration?
You mean in this box, right? I think so. Here's the thing: when I first created this curriculum, it was designed pre-COVID, and there were field trips to communities. There were guest artists coming in, and pedagogy of the oppressed and theater of the oppressed. We're doing all these things, person in person, and all these supports and so on and so forth. And it's a trauma-informed education and exploring that through dance, through theater, through collaboration, through conversation, and so on and so forth. But when this hit, I had to redo all of it. But I still was like, you know what? I'm still going to have my presenters come in and present the way they want to present. In terms of meeting, seeing the community, I had the community come to us. I had 2 to 3 students from the community, from public schools, speak on their perspectives and then have an engaging conversation in class. In terms of like, I had examples of, you know, discussing these kinds of conversations through, theater of the oppressed. We were supposed to be moving. But as spec actors, you can still do that via, you know, virtual. So, you know, we have these boxes and I would have, let's say, Joe Wilson and Jassmen, you're going to be doing this scene, right? So the scenario is this, and that. And then I would give them the scene and then everyone would mute theirs. And then you two would go into a conversation to address whatever issue it was. And then the conversation goes back out to the audience, the cohort or the students or the class. And then now they're looking at it in that sense and then come back in and redo the whole conversation again. So it's still working. I just had to recreate it in a format where it makes sense for us to teach here. Is it exactly the same as what I had originally? No, not at all.
But the beautiful thing about it is that
Yes.
it's something that we always try to do is bring people to us in our theatrical spaces. And what you've in essence done is the thing that we always talk about is how do we provide spaces that members of our community can also serve as those teachers and give us their stories and provide lessons. And so this kind of exchange that's happening is and I get you, man. Ain't it something to have taught for 25 years and feel like and you have to make up every course all over again like you've never taught?
Yeah, listen, it's wild.
So hey, listen, this would be a good place to move on to some questions, Christina. Yeah.
Michelle and I just went back and forth a little bit. I just want to ask one kind of general follow-up to everybody. And I talked individually to some of you, and Joe talked individually to others, and Joe and I talked together to Athena. What was interesting in the conversations that I had was, despite how difficult this year was, really everyone expressed at one point or another a realization of something that was a positive that came out of the year that would not have happened if it had not been for, it was exactly what Sokeo was just describing. Kind of the restrictions and the constrictions and the you can't do it this way forced a kind of creative thinking of doing it another way. And so you don't each have to answer, but I know, Tosin, you talked about that. Athena, you did. Jassmen, certainly. Amy, I'm sure that there were things in your classroom. So anybody that wants to just, if that sparks anything, talk about that, because I think sometimes it feels very, very overwhelming day to day. And then sometimes I myself will think back to a few months ago and realize I'm doing things now that I would never have been able to do and I wouldn't have had to do. And I would have kicked and screamed to not have to do, but then it became the only way I could arrive at something. So I'm just curious about that idea.
I can hop in and say something. I think the ability, I know multitasking is, when you're thinking about mindfulness, is next to near impossible because it's hard to multitask. But when I think about what we've had to do in the sense of everything being turned around and where we are right now. So currently I have students in person and then students that are in quarantine. So I am teaching in person to my students, online to the students, as all at the same time, making sure, okay, kiddo, are you able to follow along? Do you have any questions? And I go over to that student on the computer as I'm teaching the rest of the class. It's something, it's very difficult, but now in the past, I never thought I'd be able to do something like that. Now it has just become second nature to us as educators in the classroom.
As for a bit of a student perspective, I think that this whole quarantine pandemic, I think that it instilled a backbone into many students, things that we normally wouldn't be doing before. A lot of people use their computer for leisure, for example, games or watching YouTube, but now students have been able to turn that utilizing computers into organizing more Zooms or webinars or helping their teachers organize huge meetings. And I think that students have been utilizing it to their advantage, organizing clubs after school, maybe making new clubs because they've gotten into more contact with other teachers or graduate students or maybe colleges, and trying to organize things because of their past skills. And I think that there's a lot of positive outcomes that you can make of these things that are happening now, especially with a lot of the free time people have had on their hands lately. And so I think that the youth has done a great job at excelling their academic careers and what they want to do. But I also think the teachers have been the ones who have been helping a lot, helping students get to where they need to be and actually caring during this time of need.
Tosin, how about you? What does it spark for you?
I definitely feel like at first the Zooms and everything, doing it for 6 to 10 hours every day was really taxing. But I feel like, kind of to Athena's point, a lot of the ways people have kind of upended the way they originally have done things and have changed it and used it for positive impact. Like, I'm now part of the Sunrise RI Youth Coalition for Climate, Economic, and Racial Justice. And we've been doing a lot of Zoom calls and talking about these issues with my peers, people around my age. It's been really interesting to do it over Zoom and just be part of things. And it kind of now feels pretty normal and feels less taxing, and like I'm on my screen for such a long period of time.
Jassmen, anything?
But I think for me, is just more of a focus on family that I don't think would have been the case if things were continuing as they are. I live in a multi-generational home, parents on the first floor apartment, siblings on second floor apartment, and then my family on the third floor apartment. And one tradition that we started early in the pandemic was every Friday we'd like have a pizza party and try to make or order pizza from a different place and guess like, all right, how much longer do you think this is going to go on? And it's really funny. Well, I don't know if funny is the word, but it's wild to think back of what our estimates were of like, oh, maybe this will last 7 weeks, or, you know, once pastiche is open again, then that's a sign that like we're moving forward. But above all, like we just had this intentional time together every week that like it would take us like months to get together, even though we lived in the same, you know, under the same roof, that we would never come together in those ways. So that was just, that's been really nice. That's just been a really nice thing to come out of it.
And she's back.
I am back. Hello, everyone. So I have some questions from our audience members, and the first one is to all of you, actually. The question is from Linda. She asked, is there anything that changed with the pandemic that you think will persist after the pandemic?
I'll jump in, can I? And say that I think that, Jassmen, what you said resonates so much with me because you mentioned the word intention. I think in the beginning of COVID and the beginning of what we've all experienced, you know, you felt a sense of hopelessness and like you actually had no control over what was going on. And the process of now turning what seems to be something I don't have control over it and making the time spent intentional. Being intentional about what we do, the relationships we forge. You know, Athena is learning Japanese and plays like 16,000 instruments, you know. So trying to find ways to use that time with intention, whether that be our work in the arts or our work in education and developing new pedagogies, because it's not only a matter of us not teaching the way we taught before. I can't teach what I taught before, because the way I taught before and the pedagogy that I was trained under, much of it is anti-Black, and it's based in white supremacy and systemic oppression. So that's when I tell my kids, it's like, this is going to be a lot more work for us. But what Joe is trying to do is, I'm trying to bring more voices into this room. We're going to read some more plays. I'm not going to just hand you Death of a Salesman. I'm not going to cast you in things. We all have to take license and agency in this work. So I hope that doesn't change. I hope that we all continue to decolonize ourselves and our pedagogies. But also I think is really important is in this virtual world, Lord have mercy, I'm just lucky I haven't hung up on anybody in Zoom yet since March. I have not done that yet. But I will say that this virtual world will be with us, I believe, beyond pandemic. Obviously, there are problems in terms of access, in terms of whether you're talking about Wi-Fi or equipment or whatever. But I think that institutions really need to grapple with, but there's been a positive thing about this that I think everyone has spoken to, is there has been a certain amount of increase in access and the ability to have more license and agency and forming new partnerships, organizations, places I couldn't be and things I couldn't see. I now can go online and do that. So I think there will be a virtual component to every institution. And I think there should be a virtual component to every institution, because I do think while there is a shortcoming in that work, it's still, going back to my comments about anti-racism, decolonization, it's still providing a little bit more access. And to me, that's the most important thing. I hope that doesn't change.
I'll echo that and just very quickly say at PPL, we found that our attendance to our events is way, way, way higher than it had ever been before, because people don't have to worry about issues of physical ability, geographical location, anything. So we are definitely figuring out how do we keep that hybrid way of doing things.
Piggybacking off of what Joe and Christina said, I think that something that will persist will be conversations. I think more conversations will be had in the classroom, to peers, with everyone around us. I think there's going to be way more accountability now that a lot of people's eyes have been opened, and I think that it's a great opportunity and we can really make something big out of it.
Great, and I have a question here for Athena, and it looks like a couple of you could answer this as well. It looks like you're flourishing and doing really well now creatively, but as a musician, was there a time at the beginning of the pandemic where you felt like you were faltering, or that you didn't just have the spirit to do it? And if so, what was that spark that made you continue again?
Okay, so for me as a musician, I've had a rocky relationship with instruments. I started very late. I started very late in kind of the competitive realm. Usually the people that make it into official orchestras and bands have been playing since they've been like 5 years old, or have had private lessons and tutors like weekly, but I had never done that. And so I kind of just pride myself on practicing a very long time and having that work ethic where every day I allocate a certain amount of time to my instrument and really feeling the music and like knowing the music rather than buying the music. And so recently, when quarantine happened, COVID happened, everything was different. We couldn't go in person and play. I wasn't really having Zooms with my band because before that in school, our band had kind of been faltering. There wasn't enough funding in the first place to keep continuing for some things. Like instruments weren't being fixed regularly and students were kind of dropping out because they were having other things to do. So then when COVID hit, kind of like less people were joining the band, and we weren't really Zooming because like Zoom at that point wasn't really catered towards instruments. There would be a lot of cutouts and delays when we were playing. So of course at some point I felt, this is kind of like, should I keep doing this? Because then I also had the aspect of my race and how whenever I'm in an orchestra or a band, I'm the only Black girl there, or the only Black person, period, in a band. And we just play a bunch of the same music that doesn't really interest me and doesn't have any type of representation for people of color, whether they be Black, whether they be Asian, whether they be Hispanic. There's no representation whatsoever. But I think that for me, during this time, I use it as a kind of, hey, I can use this time to get better and to show that I can get a first chair in an orchestra where there's 60 people who are white, and then I could be a first chair and I can be a Black girl, and I can play my own music by composers of color, and I can ask my teacher, hey, can we play this by maybe Yukio Nishimura today? Can we play maybe by a Black composer or someone of color? Can we play this in our orchestra? And maybe they'll be open-minded and be like, hey, we should do that, because I think that a lot of teachers are doing that. My orchestra teacher, he implemented a song composed by an Asian woman, and it was one of the best songs that I've ever played. And I was like, wow, this is why I play instruments. This is why I join and try out for orchestras. This is why, because of the representation, because of the music that's made. And I think that if you're a musician, there's been a time where you thought like, this is kind of too much. Like, do I want to do this? Or this is hard. But once you really put in the work into it and you stay dedicated, the payoff is way, way better than any doubt you've ever felt before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Athena. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's a question here for Amy. So being a teacher of such young children, did you feel they were more apt to embracing some of the new changes that we had to deal with? And what was it like when you saw some of the kids dropping off because of responsibility with family?
So it was tough, and I'll never forget the day that we found out we were going to be out for the rest of the year. I had to deal with it with my 14-year-old, who that was her last year of middle school. Then I had to connect with my fifth graders online, and knowing that as a possibility was we would not see each other again in person. I think that's where I hit my lowest of the low right there. Had a little crying in the bathroom alone, picked myself up, and had to face my students online. Had my husband deal with my daughter. At that point, I could do mommy, but I knew my students needed me. We connected online. They cried. I cried again with them. And I said, and at the end of that day, we just kind of talked, and I put them in breakout rooms and I just let them play any online games they wanted to. We came back together at the end of the day, and I said, tomorrow's a new day. We still get to see each other. And I will do anything in my power to ensure that we have some sort of in-person get together at the end of the year. And I was able to do that. We did an online graduation with the students, a farewell ceremony. But I went to school and I met with each of my fifth graders one-on-one just to bring that closure to them. And we did that with our entire fifth grade class. And that to me was one of my best days. To be able to see the smiles on their faces, that was pretty priceless. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I really respect everything that everyone does here, and just the heart that teachers have, that we all have for each other. It's just really special. And I'm sorry to say that we're running out of time, but that was just a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. I don't know if anyone has any last thoughts.
I would like to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who is here. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for allowing us the honor to hear them and to receive them. And, I know I will take everything that you all have said as a lesson, again, as the teacher being the student. And so thank you. Thank you very much for being here. And we look forward to continuing these conversations over the next few months. And also look forward to many of you joining us later on in the spring as we come together to celebrate, and we're going to make some stuff. All right? We're going to make some stuff.
Thank you, everybody. It's also just at a dark time. It was very inspiring to spend this week talking to each of you and now to all of you together. So thank you again for all the work you're doing.
I want to thank you all, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in tonight. And you can join us back here on March 25th. The next theme for America 2 is It's Our People. This project is made possible in part by a grant from the Rhode Island Council on the Humanities, an independent affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. The Rhode Island Council for the Humanities seeds, supports, and strengthens public history, cultural heritage, civic education, and community engagement by and for all Rhode Islanders. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities.